Hello, and welcome back to An Atheist Reads the Bible, where I read and review the King James Bible from my own perspective as an atheist. I'm evaluating it for 5 things as I read. Things that are new to me, literal truth, literary value, moral value, and significance to modern issues. In this video, I'll be covering Genesis chapters 1 and 2, which are the 2 accounts of creation. But first, mail call. Not much in the way of comments or requests last week, but I did have one commenter suggest that I start with the Gospels instead, because that's where the parts about Jesus are. He or she was worried I'd lose interest before I got that far and wanted me to at least learn something about Jesus. Well, it's certainly possible that I'll lose interest, but I'm still not going to start at the Gospels. The coming of Jesus is supposed to be the culmination of everything in the Bible leading up to it. And if I'm not familiar with that material, how can I fully understand Jesus' significance? Also, I tried to start with the Gospels once before. It was Matthew, by the way. I checked since I made my last video. And I guess that means that request has already been filled. I have learned something already. Besides, when you're as disorganized as I am, jumping around like that is just a recipe for disaster. I am sure to miss something. So I'll be sticking with the plan of going through the Bible from cover to cover, and if I get distracted, I guess I get distracted. But the suggestion is welcome. Thank you for offering it. Chapter 1 of Genesis is the account of creation in 6 days, and I will summarize it. Day 1, God creates heaven and earth and separates light from darkness. Day 2, God creates the firmament and separates the waters above and the waters below. I have no idea what that refers to. Third day, God creates lands and plants, basically. Calls them herbs and whatnot, whatever. Fourth day, God creates the sun, moon, and stars and places them in the firmament. Fifth day, God creates all water life and all winged fowl. And the 6th day, God creates beasts and humans. So, running through my rubric for chapter 1. First off, parts that are new to me. I'm not seeing any new stuff here. I've read this before, at least this part of Genesis before, and it's familiar to me from popular culture. I doubt that I will be seeing much new material until I get out of Genesis, and maybe not until I get out of the Old Testament. But I'm keeping an eye out for it anyway. Item 2 on my rubric, truth value. Now, there's a lot of scientific objections to be raised for this creation account. For example, plants were made a day before the sun when plants require the sun to live. Or there's kind of a history written into the natural environment, be it geology or the fossil record or light traveling to us from distant stars. And most of these dispute the chronology being described in Genesis chapter 1. Now, I'm going to spot most of these to the Bible, at least as far as outright calling it out for errors goes. I mean, I'm already being asked to believe that all sorts of magic or miracles or whatever are being thrown around. And if I'm willing to accept that for the sake of argument, I'll let it have just a little bit more magic to keep the plants alive for a day, or to create the rocks so that they appear to have been around for a lot longer than they actually have been, and even have the continents line up like a little jigsaw puzzle. Sure, I will grant that for the sake of argument, even if it doesn't explicitly list that as things that happen. Or maybe having the interstellar light poof into existence already en route to us. I will spot that to the Bible. I will give it that. Now, just to be clear, I am very much inclined towards the scientific accounts. And I'm not going to just say that the biblical account is true, not without at least some evidence. But I'm trying to be open-minded, and thus I'm giving the Bible a lot of leeway. I said that I'll be looking for contradictions, but I am setting an extremely high bar to clear before I dub something a contradiction. I think that these conflicts with the scientific accounts are problems for the biblical account, but I don't think it clears that high of a bar that I'm setting. That said, there are a couple of things that I seized upon. Quoting from verses 2 to 4, starting in the middle of verse 2, and this is still Genesis chapter 1 we're talking about here. Quote, "Darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, Let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness." Exactly what kind of light are we talking about here? We don't have the traditional light sources of the sun and the stars yet. Is it talking about a bright blue sky even without the sun being there, and somehow this was possible without the sun? Okay, fine, I'm already spotting the Bible, this kind of temporary magic. Fine. Bright blue sky, that's the light it's talking about, maybe. So darkness is already there before God makes light. It's on the face of the deep, whatever that means, in verse 2. Then God makes light, but then God separates light from darkness, and this is the part that really gets me confused. Were light and darkness mixed? It sounds like whoever wrote this thought that darkness was a substance that was the opposite of light, when it's really just the absence of light. Add light to darkness and you just have the light you had to start with. The darkness doesn't dilute it any. So how can you separate light from darkness? What does that concept even mean? This reads like it was written by someone who didn't understand how light works. So the second thing that I'm pouncing on here, in the second day, verse 6, we have God saying, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the water from the waters." And at the same time, he calls the firmament heavens, and he does this with a capital H for some reason, and I will get into that later on, why the capital letters are significant. This is distinct from the first day when he said heaven, when it said created heaven, and that was with a small h. I'll talk about that in a bit. I think I've scheduled to talk about that in chapter 2. Moving on, in the fourth day, verse 14, "And God said, Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven," and this is with a small h. Verses 16 through 18. "And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. And God set them in the firmament of heaven," small h, "to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness," which apparently he wasn't done doing yet. And where was it? "To divide the light from the darkness, and God saw that it was good." So, wait a minute. The firmament? I thought I knew what this meant, and it did not fit into the win column for the Bible. But I wasn't sure I was remembering the definition of the word firmament right, so I hit Wikipedia to confirm it, and it turned out that I had the definition exactly right. Now, since the last video, you may have noticed that I've improved my video editing abilities to include some very clumsy takes and cuts. I've also just now noticed that I was overexposing the image and I had it backwards. Now, I am going to try to get some graphics in here, right around in here, and we'll see. I really don't know if my editing foo is up to this. Could get a bit technical here. There we go. Now, the firmament is part of the geocentric model of the universe. This is the idea that the Earth is at the center of everything and that everything orbits around the Earth. It was popular for a while, and then not so much popular. Here I've drawn Earth flat, a little bit of water trailing down from it. This model works just as well, or just as badly, if you use a round Earth instead. The firmament were these 8 spheres that were supposed to go around the Earth and nest them kind of like those Russian dolls, one doll inside the other. Here it's one sphere inside the other. I've drawn them cut in half, drawn them very badly cut in half, as hemispheres, but the idea was that they went all the way around. Now, the outermost sphere was supposed to have all the stars fixed in it. Firmament, by the way, the root word here is firm, as in solid. These were supposed to be solid, transparent spheres, often called crystal spheres. Now, the outermost one had all the stars, and as it would move, these things were supposed to be spinning. As it would move, the stars that were fixed into it would appear to rise and set when viewed from the Earth. Similarly, we had all the 7 classical planets moving around inside the stars, independent of them. And this was used to explain why these objects appeared to move separately from the fixed stars, which, as the name implies, appeared to be fixed in position relative to each other. They actually aren't, but to the naked eye they appear to be. By the way, the moon and the sun were considered planets. Planet, the word was Greek for wanderer, and under the definition of something that appears to move in the sky relative to the fixed stars, they technically were. On the modern definition, they're not, but under the old definition, they were. So this is the firmament that the Bible is talking about here. These fixed, solid, crystal spheres upon which the lights of the heavens, the planets, the stars, including the sun, the moon as planets, upon which they were hung. Now, without going into the details of the history of astronomy here, this has been thoroughly debunked. And, I kind of want to go into the details of that. I mean, that would make a great video in its own right, but I think this is going to be too long as is, so I'll just leave that stand. This has been completely debunked, but it's in the Bible. And I'd say that's a mark against the Bible. And just to be clear, that's not a mark against the Bible just in the way that the other scientific objections were marks against the Bible. This isn't just an example of something that you can explain away with a puff of magic at the beginning of creation. This is something that they were claiming was the actual fact afterwards. That is definitely on a different level. I would say that that is contradicting with reality. Now, I said I checked Wikipedia to make sure I was remembering the word right. Though what I just talked about was my own knowledge once I'd confirmed that I was remembering it right. But there was something that Wikipedia mentioned when I checked it, and I hadn't known that beforehand. When heliocentrism, the model in which everything revolves around the sun, which is much closer to reality, when that became the scientific consensus, I think it was about a century after the King James Bible was first published. When that became the established scientific consensus, Bible translations started shifting to be more science-friendly. They reworded themselves so that they were no longer talking about the firmament. And that is a huge can of worms right there. Science informing how we read and translate the Bible. And I'd love to get into it, but again, I'm running too long. So let me just say that the King James Version seems to contradict with reality on this point, and that's the translation which I'm reviewing. Again, love to get into it, won't have time. Now, back to the overall question, is this the literal truth? Well, I pinged on one inaccuracy on the nature of light, and one thing that violated scientific observations that anyone can make with good binoculars and a bit of trigonometry. So there are at least two parts that aren't truth. But even if it weren't for that, it doesn't feel true. It feels like any of the dozens of different creation stories I've come across from other cultures. It feels like a myth. And while it asserts its own truth simply by way of making its claims, it doesn't provide anything in the way of evidence to set itself ahead of the other explanations. So, I'm not buying it, at least not yet. Now, moving on through the rubric here, item 3, literary value. Its literary value isn't all that bad. There's a repetitive pattern throughout it all. God says a thing, let so-and-so happen, and then so-and-so happens, and God sees it's good, and then the evening and the morning make the nth day. And it feels almost like a poetry. It's not exactly in careful meter and rhyme. I kind of wonder whether it was in the original Hebrew, but the repetition has a nicely mesmerizing pattern to it. I wonder how it would sound as a chant or as a rap. It's not great, but it's pretty good. I'd probably wouldn't put it in the top 100 works of the world, but it might maybe be a contender for the top 1,000, and that's pretty good given all the literary stuff out there. Okay, so item 4, moral value. There's not much here of moral consequence, so I'm going to skip that for this chapter and move on to item 5, significance, modern significance. Okay, so first we see God showcased in the role of the creator, which is at the core of half of the apologetic arguments for God that I've encountered. So I have to flag that even if most of us are aware that it's there and that it's significant. But there was this one verse near the end that has a lot more significance than I think most people realize. This is verse 28, still in chapter 1 of Genesis. Quote, "And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all of the earth, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth." Now, there are two things I want to flag there. The beginning of verse 28, where it says to be fruitful and multiply, plays a role in the debate over contraception and same-sex, sex. Obviously, people having sex with condoms or having sex with people of the same sex aren't really out there to multiply. And sometimes this verse is trotted out as a reason why that's bad, though later verses are more popular for this. But in any case, this feeds into the debate of sex solely for reproduction versus sex for pleasure or for social reasons, and it also has an effect on issues of world overpopulation. But for a big impact, look at the second part of this verse, where they're told to subdue the earth and give it dominion over every living thing. This has a pretty big impact on environmental issues. Now, within environmentalism, there's a line you can make to divide environmentalist activism into two categories. There's ecocentric environmentalism, which says that nature is valuable in and of its own self. And then there's homocentric or human-centric environmentalism, which says that nature is valuable because of what it does for us. The difference isn't about goals of environmental activism so much as it's about motivation. The human centric environmentalist wants to preserve the rainforests because of tourism value or the amount of carbon dioxide they can convert to oxygen and how that helps us, or for the potential medicines that we might find there, and for all other sorts of what's essentially enlightened self interest. The ecocentric environmentalist is the one who wants to save the rainforest for the rainforest's sake and not for our sake. Now, all of this can happen outside of the Christian mindset. But this passage in Genesis says that nature has been given to us to subdue, dominate, and use, basically to exploit, which kind of rules out the ecocentric mindset. A big chunk of conservative Christianity has long been in opposition to the environmental movement based on this doctrine. Essentially, if everything's out there just for us to take it, we don't have to think it has value all of its own. We can hunt species to extinction, overfish waters until there's nothing left, clear cut forests until they're all gone. Yeah, no ecocentric basics whatsoever. Now, I don't want to blow this out of proportion. It was never the case that all Christians took this divine mandate to subdue and dominate the earth as grounds to trash the environment. Not even all biblical literalists did that. And even conservative Christians are shifting on this point to emphasize our role as being one of stewards over God's creation rather than simply its exploiters. But this divine mandate has played, and continues to play, a significant role in the modern debate on the environment. Alright, so my original plan for tonight was to get through chapters 1 through 3 of Genesis. 3 chapters. Before I started recording, I kind of pared that down to 2 chapters because I knew I would have too much to say to fit into one video. And now it just got cut down to 1 chapter. So, yeah, this is taking too long. So I will hit chapter 2 next week, and chapter 3 the week after that, assuming I can keep to that schedule. I think I should be able to keep to that schedule for at least those next 2 chapters. But that's the end of my review of chapter 1 of Genesis. I invite you to read this text along with me if you are interested and have the inclination and the time. Please leave your comments below. I will react to them. I want to engage with them. If you have suggestions, please make them. If you have things in chapter 2 that you want me specifically looking for and specifically responding to, post those as well in the comments down below. Don't forget to rate this video, and I will see you next time.